This evening, on behalf of Shishukunj, we are pleased to invite Shivbhai Haria, founder and MD of Lifestyle Property Group and the 100K Club. I also like to mention he's also grown up in Shishukunj. He came from the age of 10 years and to the 18. And yes, I remember being with him when he was young and seeing him grow. Shivbhai is a multi-award winning business owner and investor whose mission is to help people create financial security and independence. His group of companies has purchased well over 350 properties for clients over the last 5 years and has won multiple awards, including Best Customer Service in the SME National Business Award 2021 and Best Property Investment Agency 2022. So Shivbhai, thank you very much for coming to our session, and I'd like to pass over to you. Shivbhai.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Let me just share my screen with you guys. Can everyone see my screen? Just give me a thumbs up or something if you can see it, one of these. Perfect, okay. Let me minimize that. Perfect. Okay, so as you heard, my name is Shivbhai. I have been part of Shishukunj for quite some time now, and it has really, I believe, changed my life. It's allowed me to go on to do these kind of things with the support network to start a number of different projects. Thank you, Lakshmi Ben, for inviting me to speak to you, your audience today. I'm really passionate about making sure that people understand the importance of investing in property specifically, but investing in general. And just as we were talking about before we got onto this call, I think a lot of people think about investments when they're in their kind of late 40s, as in they have had their kids, they've now paid off some of their house, they have their car in the bank. And at that point, they start to think about investing. And actually what I think we should be doing is trying to encourage people to invest when they're much younger, when they're probably in their 20s. Because if they invest in their 20s, everybody on this call will know, if you have ever bought a house, that over 10 years, over 20 years, over 30 years, house prices tend to increase. So if you buy, let's say, for example, a £200,000 house when you're in your 20s, by the time you get to your 60s, it's probably going to be worth well over £1 million. Whereas if you do it when you're in your 50s, you just don't have as much time for that that value to increase. So definitely that's what the mission is. Today, this evening, we're going to be learning about how to create wealth through property. And at the end, there's going to be some time for Q&A. Because of the complicated setup that I have over here, I can't see everyone's faces. So if you do have a question, I don't even know if I can see the comments. So please write your comments down, the questions down. If you want to, you might by all means unmute yourself to ask me a question. Otherwise, just wait until the end, and then I'll be able to switch the screens and be able to see all of your faces. As well as that, I've got a special gift for all of you just at the end. So if you stay until the end, then you'll be able to get that gift. First thing is, who is this webinar for? So I'm going to go through these, but as I'm going through these, I want you to identify which of these situations most resonates with you. So the first one is, I'm looking to invest, but I'm not quite sure where to put my money. Second one is, I want to invest in property, but I don't know how to get started. The third one is investing in property still a good idea in 2023? You know, the market's a bit unstable at the moment. The next one is, I want to set up myself financially for the future. And the final one is, I really want to get my money working for me. I've worked really hard for so many years, and now I want to make sure that not just myself, but my children, my children's children are going to benefit from all the hard work that I put in over the last few years. And ultimately what we're going to cover, in fact, I'm going to skip this slide because we're going to go into it straight away. I have about 50 slides, by the way, so we have to be quite quick. First thing is, why invest in buy-to-let property? I'm going to start off by just telling you a bit more about my story and a bit more about why did I do it? So I started in buy-to-let property around about a decade ago. So in 2013, whilst I was traveling around South America, I got a call from my brother, and he says that you have to come home because your mum, who is here on the screen, mum has had a heart attack. So I said, oh my God, mum has had a heart attack. And I obviously eventually took a flight and I came home. After a few weeks of intensive care, she eventually started to recover, But unfortunately, she was never able to return back to work in a full-time capacity. And that's what made me start thinking about, well, hold on a second, what do other people do in these kind of situations? How do other people make their ends meet? And I quickly started to do some Googling, and I started to understand a bit more about investments, specifically about property. And after a lot of research in 2015, I actually ended up moving up to Leeds in the north of the UK to build a property portfolio for myself and also for my family. So the reason why I do all of this stuff, or how I got started, was because of my parents, who are on the screen in front of you. So why should we actually invest in property? So this is a great saying from a well-known man: never depend on a single stream of income, make investments and create a second source. The first reason is that we should invest is exactly this. If the pandemic has taught us just one thing, it's that most of us are very reliant on the income that we get from our jobs, or from a single stream at least. And if our companies were ever in trouble, the people that employ us, well, they probably wouldn't think twice about firing us or replacing us, because they have their P&Ls and they have their shareholders and things like that. So that's all the more reason that more and more people now are looking to create a secondary passive income source through investing in property. They're trying to make sure that if anything was to happen, whether it's the company or whether it's the pandemic, that they have another income source and they're not going to be left out in their cold for themselves and also for their families. The second reason, I'm sure you guys will have understood this principle already, is that house prices in the UK tend to increase over time. Why do house prices tend to increase? I mean, that's just simple economics. The demand for houses is greater than the supply of houses, and as a result, the prices continue to increase. But why is the demand greater than the supply in the UK? There's a very structural reason why. The first is that the UK is an island, so there's only a limited amount of land available to build on in the first place. Now, if you take away all of the land that we have for, green belt and things like that, for forests and things, there's not a huge amount of land available to build on. On top of that, the second reason is that the UK offers a very safe environment and a stable economy. And a lot of people that are on this call will be from India, from Kenya, from some of these places, and you'll know those environments where it's not always that safe. I was just last week in Mexico. We had a client in Mexico, and I said to him, why don't you just invest in Mexico? He told me the numbers were similar to the ones that we were looking at. And he said, oh, but because Mexico doesn't have such a stable economy. I don't know if tomorrow the house is still going to be there, or if the government is going to take the house, whatever. So people want to invest in the UK, and that's people that are obviously from the UK, but also people that are from abroad, which is why the UK property prices tend to increase. And the third reason is, as many of you know, now there is a trend towards smaller family units. Gone are the days when we used to live 10 people in one house, and now it's usually 2 people, sometimes even 1 person. As well as that, we have more people that are getting divorced. So where there's one family, you now need 2 houses. And all of these reasons mean that we need more properties. And finally, as a country, every year we just fail to build enough houses to meet the demand, sorry. And as a result of that, there just continuously is a growing gap between the demand and the supply of housing. The thing that underpins all of these reasons why we should invest in property is that housing is a necessity. People need to live in houses. So unlike in the stocks and shares market, or even the commodities or whatever, why are we investing in these things? Because we think they're going to go up. In the UK, property is a necessity. People need to live in those houses, and it's not going to go out of fashion anytime soon. People are not going to start suddenly living in forests or in their cars. The next reason that we need to look at investing in property is that, unlike other asset classes, you can actually use leverage, which is basically getting a loan from the bank in the form of a mortgage, to invest, to make your investment go further. So this graph over here shows you what would have happened if you had invested £1,000 in each of these different asset classes in the year 2000. And what you'll see at the bottom there is, if you had put £1,000 in cash, you'll have almost doubled your money now, which is amazing. Really great use of money. But of course, we can see that if you had put it in the stock market, you would have almost tripled your money. So even that's a better way of doing it than cash. But right at the top there, if we look at buy-to-let property with a 25% deposit, then what that means is that you will have been able to get 15 times the amount of return that you would have got with if you had just from the initial investment. And that's the reason why people are looking at investing in money in property, because they can use the bank and use the money that the bank is going to give them to leverage their investment and to multiply their investment. I just want you to think about that for a second. So what is happening is that the properties are considered such a safe investment that the bank, a random third party, will say to you, listen, we want to buy a £100,000 house. You put in 25% and we'll put in 75%. How many other investments do you guys know that somebody else, a third party, will say, I know you want to buy this thing for 100,000. I'm going to give you 75,000 to go and buy it. Very, very few other investments. The fourth reason is that property is a stable asset class, as we mentioned. This is a graph that shows you the expected return versus the expected risk. And for a lot of people, certainly people that are in their basically 30 to 60s, people don't want to take a lot of risk. We've worked very hard to make the money that we have, and we don't want to put it into something risky, because if we put it into something risky, we could lose it all. Unlike in the stock market, which sometimes just seems a little bit like gambling, or even the cryptocurrency market, which, you know, it might be here today, it might be gone tomorrow, who knows? Property has been around for hundreds of years and is actually the security on which all the other securities are based on. So the majority of your money wants to be in low risk, well-established asset classes. And I'm not saying we shouldn't invest in other asset classes. It's just that that might be, for most people, a much smaller percentage of the overall investment value. So for example, if we had £100,000, we might consider that we're going to put 60, 80,000 pounds or 60, 70,000 pounds in property, maybe 20, 30,000 pounds in stocks and shares, and then split the rest of 5, 10% between the other asset classes, for example. So we've talked about property, and we know that property is a good investment. We don't need to go over that too much. But what is the actual process of investing in property? How does it actually work? Let's go through that. So the first thing that we need to do before we even start to go and find a property is we need to be prepared to find a property. We need to be prepared to agree a sale with the agent once we have found a property. And the way we do that is by collecting all of our documents to start with. I'm going to go through at the end of this presentation exactly what documents you need to do in order to get started. But first thing we need to do is collect our documents and make sure that we can get a decision in principle from the mortgage lender, so we know that we can definitely go ahead and purchase the property. Then we need to go and source the property. And just before we source the property, we need to obviously understand what exactly are we looking for? What kind of property? Where is it going to be? How many bedrooms is it going to have? What kind of roof is it going to have? And basically, what does a good deal look like in property? Once we've done that, we then need to figure out how are we going to negotiate the price with the agents. One thing that maybe some of you will know is that unlike in the stock market, where there is only a single price, if you want to buy, for example, shares in Ryanair, you have to pay whatever the price is today. You cannot buy it cheaper, you cannot buy it more expensive. If you want to buy it right now, it's got to be that price. In property, when we invest in property, it's actually up to the buyer and the seller to negotiate on the price. And that means that there's no one price for property. A lot of you on this call will have seen in the past where there are two properties right next to each other, next door to each other, and they're very similar properties, but one property sells for X pounds and the other property sells for X plus 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 pounds. It sells for more. It sells for a different price. And if they're the very same property, how can they sell for different prices? Just because this person was willing to negotiate better and they wanted to sell at a cheaper price, and this person wanted to hold out for a more expensive price. So that is all that the difference is. Once you have agreed the sale with the estate agent, then you want to make sure you start putting in the mortgage application. Now, of course, there is a choice about whether to buy with cash or whether to buy with a mortgage, and we can certainly go through the pros and cons later. In general, for me, it makes sense to buy with a mortgage because it means that your cash can go further. For the sake of argument, if I have £100,000 or £200,000 and I can buy one property with a mortgage, with that same money, I can probably buy one property in cash. I can probably buy 3 properties with a mortgage. So I'm using the numbers that I'm used to, and the same numbers won't work where you are. But ultimately, what I'm saying is your money can go further and you can buy maybe 2 or 3 times the number of properties if you use the bank's leverage. The next stage of the process, once you have got the mortgage offer from the bank, is you can start the legal paperwork. So all of the legal work takes some time, but it starts with engaging a solicitor. So they'll send out an engagement letter. They'll do some ID checks on you. And once they've done that, they then will apply for the property searches. By the time you've got to that place, you're probably about 50% through. So people think it's quite easy. I just look for a property and I buy it, and that's the end of it. But actually, all this that we've covered so far, we're only about 50% of the way through at this point. So at the point that we have the searches back, then we have a whole bunch of queries that have to be answered, and the solicitor, your solicitor, as in the buyer solicitor and the seller solicitors, will go back and forth over a number of things and make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And at that point, the solicitor, your solicitor, will create a report of all of their findings. What have they found about this property? Is it a good property? Is there any problems with it, etc.? And they will send it to you in the form of a report. The report is a very thick report. It has a whole bunch of information in it. But what you want to do really is read the first few pages and the last few pages. The middle pages are all just for reference only. The first few pages are the ones where the solicitor has outlined what are the issues that you need to be aware of when you're buying this property. And so they have done all the work, they've gathered all the evidence, and then they have written their findings in the first few pages. The last page is for you to sign at the end to say, yes, I want to go ahead and purchase the property. So all of that searches and the legal work culminate in you completing on the property. That means that you have been able to purchase the property. And that whole process of buying the house itself can take 3 to 4 months. I'm sure some of you are aware. It can be quicker sometimes, but even if you have cash, it can quite easily take between 2 months and 3 months, depending on the back and forth that needs to happen between the seller solicitor and the buyer solicitor. So the process of buying it can take 3 to 4 months. And the next stage after we buy it, of course, is sometimes the properties may require refurbishment works. And even if we think that, they're great properties, they don't need to be refurbished, what we need to realize is that when we're investing in property, that we not only need to bring the property up to a good aesthetic standard, we also need to make sure that tenant safety and compliance is being met. So there's a lot of rules and regulations about renting property. You need to make sure there are gas certificates, electrical test reports, make sure the EPC is up to date. So right now, the EPC needs to be over an E, but in a couple of years' time, that is going to go up to a C as well. Just so that I don't say acronyms, EPC is the Energy Performance Certificate. Some of you will have heard of it. It just basically says how energy efficient is your house. The whole country is trying to move, the whole world actually is trying to move to a more energy efficient place. And as a result, the government is imposing that all rented properties need to have an EPC of C or above in the future. Not yet, but they are going to get there at some point. So there is a whole bunch of works that may need to be done. Even if the property seems like it is ready to go, there might be some works need to be done before we can rent the property out. Once we have done those works, then it is all about letting the property. And the lettings process itself, again, can take about 4 weeks or so. So in terms of letting, the first thing we have to do is go to the property, take pictures of the property, and get it onto the marketing portals. So this will be like Rightmove, Zoopla. Some of you will have heard of these sites. And on those sites, the tenant can obviously find the property and apply to live in that property. Once we have found the tenant, then we need to vet the tenant. We need to make sure that they're the right tenant for us, go and get their references and make sure that they are good tenants. And only once we have done all of that work, which typically a letting agency will be able to help with because it's a lot of work, then we can get them to move into the property. So again, I want to just touch on this bit because people think, I'll buy the house, I'll just rent it, easy. But actually that whole rental process, there's so many checks that need to be done now. There's 118 checks that need to be done before you can rent the property in these days. As a result, I would highly recommend you use a letting agent. It just makes more sense. For a few £100s or whatever it might be, you don't need all that hassle. And also the problem is that with those 118 checks, if you miss something, then there is a chance that you could go to prison over it because they are really quite strict about these things. So just better to get somebody who's a professional to go in and do those things. And then finally, or coming on to the final few stages, once you have let the property, so once you've vetted the tenant, sorry, they can then move into the property and get all of the relevant documents in place to make sure that they've signed to say, I've received all those things. And only once that has been done, then you can gather all of the documents and invoices that you have received over the last 3 periods and put them into a file and put them in a file for safekeeping. Now, this last step, people forget all the time, and it's really important. We need to know, the price that you bought the house at, because in 20 years' time, if you come to sell the house and you don't know how much you bought it at, you might end up paying the wrong amount of tax. So there's a huge amount of information and documents and papers that you're going to get. What you want to do is make sure you file them all properly together in the right place so that when you need them, they're all there. Does that make sense so far? Perfect. So we can see that property is a great investment, and we've just covered like the basic process of investing. I didn't want to go too much into it. So let's investigate though, how can we actually get more bang for our buck? Now we are hopefully, I think the people on this call are all Asians, so we all want to get more than our money's worth. So I'm going to show you how we can actually get more for our money. So they say that a picture tells 1,000 words, and hopefully you can clearly see the difference between the north of this picture and the south of this picture. There's a huge discrepancy in the returns that you can get in the north versus the south. And this is ultimately because in the north, while the properties are cheaper, the rents are still very good. So let's say, for example, if the property is a quarter of the price, the rent will still only be a half of the price, not a quarter of the price. That means that the return is going to be better in the north. And secondly, is that your deposit can go further. So as I mentioned earlier, if you had, for example, £200,000, you might be able to buy one house in London with a mortgage. But if you have £200,000, you can probably buy 3 houses in the north with a mortgage as well. So, your money can go much, much further than if you are buying in London. As well as that, the government, as I'm sure most of you have heard in the news, and that they're turning towards their attention towards the regions. And they're funding a lot of infrastructure projects that are increasing the growth prospects of cities outside of London. So these infrastructure projects, you'll have all heard about these kind of things. One is the infrastructure banks, which came about in the last 2 years or so. The second one is the M1 widening works. You all know that for years and years, maybe a decade now, they've been widening the M1. But the reason that they're doing that is to get more people freely flowing between London and the rest of the regions that are all up along the M1. And in order to, once they get people flowing out, it means that not just people, but people and money and business can go out of London into the different regions. The reason why they're trying to improve the growth prospects of the regions is because they don't want a situation. Most of you will know that London has been growing for the last 30 years or so, but they don't want a situation where London has grown so much, but the rest of the cities haven't grown. Because if you get that situation, eventually you end up with something like a civil war. You have one city that has all the growth and all the prospects and all the prosperousness, all the money, and you have all the other cities that are not doing so well for themselves. It's not a good situation. So that's what the government's trying to do, to try and say, how can we improve the growth prospects of the other cities as well? They're also doing rail line upgrades. So we had talked about the HS2 previously. That's been canned, but actually what they've done is they've decided to use most of the money just to upgrade the rail network throughout the whole of the UK. And very recently, there was an announcement about free ports, which are basically ports around the country that have trade-free zones. Basically, you can buy things there without having to pay tax. So these are just a couple of the examples of how the government is turning their attention to provide growth prospects for cities outside of London. Then I want to just talk about one thing that's a very common misconception, and hope, if I'm right, probably 90% of the people on this call will think exactly the same thing. It's a common misconception that there is more capital growth in London, that the house prices in London increase at a faster rate than outside of London. That's what is a very common misconception. Now, it is a fact that the house prices are higher. So if you have, let's say, £1 million house and it increases by 10%, it's going to go up by £100,000. Whereas if you have, for example, a £200,000 house in the north and it goes up by 10%, it's not gone up by as much. But the rate of growth is higher in the north than it is in London at the moment. And I'm going to show you some statistics about that in a second. In fact, the percentage capital growth outside of London has been almost double that within London over the last 20 years. And I know this is an unbelievable fact, but let me show you the numbers. So just to compare some numbers between London and some of the other regions that there are outside the UK, I've picked here Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, and Sheffield. Birmingham is the second largest city in the UK, Manchester third, Leeds fourth, Sheffield is sixth. So we can see that the returns between the north, so the yields here, 4.8, 5.36, and 6.2 are higher, more than double what London's yields are. We know that already. And actually, these ones are all quite similar. Between 4.8 and 6.2, there's not a huge amount of difference. We can also see that capital growth as well in London is quite low compared to what the capital growth is in the rest of the regions. This is Zoopla UK House Price Index from January this year. So this is very recent data. The one thing that you will see, though, is that while the returns in the north are more or less the same, they don't fluctuate too much, between 4 and 6%, that kind of thing. The entry prices, though, in these cities does actually range quite a lot. So in London, while we're talking about 600,000, maybe even more than that for some of these properties, in Birmingham it's 250,000. So, less than half. But then in Manchester it's 200, and in Leeds and Sheffield, which is the areas that we predominantly look at, it's much, much lower. And that means that not only are these properties quite cheap, but the rents are still very good. It also means that they're starting from a lower place. That means that if it's got £140,000 price, the rate of growth is going to be much higher because it's just starting from a lower place. I'm going to just show you now what kind of numbers we can expect. So, for example, this is a property that we have purchased in Leeds. The purchase price was £150,000. The mortgage was £112,500. And then in terms of the funds required, so this is the money that you need from your own pocket, from your own bank to buy this house, it's just £65,000. So for £65,000, let me tell you briefly what that will cover. That will cover your deposit, so the difference between the purchase price and the mortgage. It will also cover any refurbishment works. It will also cover any professional fees, so legal fees, mortgage fees, survey fees, etc. And it will also cover any taxes. So stamp duty is the main tax that we have to pay when we buy properties. So all of those costs are covered within £65,000, and you would get this property. This is a 3-bedroom, 7-detached house in Leeds. We would then be able to rent the property out for just under £10,000. And the mortgage interest, if we calculate it at, I think it's 4%, 5%, something like that, it would be £4,500. And that would leave a profit, a cash flow, a profit of about £4,000 a year. So the yield on this property is about 6%, 6.2%, which is what we said in the last slide. And sorry, that should be capital growth, not cash flow. Capital growth is about 6% as well. And what I want you guys to understand here is that when we add the yield and the capital growth together, then you get 6.2 plus 6, which is 12.2. That's the kind of return that you'll be making, because what we're saying is you'll be making an annual profit, and then over time, the house price will also be growing. So just to be clear, on the right here where it says cash flow, that's a mistake. It should say capital growth, but we have 6.2% yield and then a 6% capital growth on this property. But that sounds exciting, but it's not that exciting because nobody really cares about making £4,000, right? Okay, let me show you what it might look like if we multiply the numbers out. Property is a long-term game, and in order for us to benefit, we really have to be playing it for the long term. Here is the example of what happens over a 10-year period. If we look at the cash flow side, so the right-hand side first, from the last slide, you saw that the cash flow, the annual profit was £4,000. If we take that £4,000 and we multiply it by 10 for 10 years, we get £40,000. Okay, now we're starting to get interested. There's a £40,000 value or profit that we have made. That's nice. And then we look at the capital, the £150,000 house that we had over a 10-year period might increase to £300,000. This has been the trend over the last sort of 10 years or so. So if it increases to £300,000, we'll have made a gain of £150,000. So £150,000 on the capital growth. So this is the value of the property increasing. and £40,000 on the cash flow, which is the annual rental profit. So if you get 150 and 40, in total, you have a value of £190,000. So that means over a 10-year period, you'll have made £190,000 on this property. But the important thing is, if you remember my last slide, you've only put in £65,000. So you put in 65, and over a 10-year period, you'll make £190,000. Now, this is just an example, but I'm just trying to show you the difference between investing in property in London versus investing in property outside of London, and the kind of differences that you can make. The other important thing here for you to see is that on the cash flow side, on the rental side, we've got £40,000. And on the capital side, we have way more than 40,000. In fact, almost 4 times as much on the capital side. So what you want to see here is that the cash flow profit over 10 years, accounts for only 20% of the overall growth. Around 20%. 40,000 divided by 190,000, about 20,000. 20%, sorry. The cash flow, the capital growth, which is £150,000, accounts for 80% of the overall value that you'll make on this property over a 10-year period. And so it's really important that you buy in the right location, you buy the right property, you make sure you get the right tenants, because the value of the property needs to be increasing sufficiently. That's where you're going to make, in this example, 80% of the value over a 10-year period. Does that make sense so far? Fantastic. Perfect. And if you go back to my point, we're going to make £190,000 worth of value by putting in £65,000 initially over a 10-year period. So if we do 190,000 divided by 65,000, we get 300%. Divided by 10 years is 30% per year. So for those of you who don't follow me, what I've just said is that in this particular property here, over a 10-year period, you'll make 300% return on your money. And it works out obviously over 10 years. So every year it's about 30% per year, which is a very good return. This kind of numbers you won't find, I don't think, in London. So what? So in short, the North is ripe for regeneration and growth, which will increase house prices and rents over the next decade. That is the message that I'm trying to get across here. Perfect. So we've looked at property, we've looked at how to invest in property, what the process is, and we've also looked at how we can boost our returns by investing in the North. But now I know some of you are thinking that's all fine, well and good, but 2023 is a bit of a dodgy year. You know, we had that whole palaver last year. Is now really the right time to invest in property? I think it's really the right time, 100%. But it's also important to tell you some more information. So these are all the generic reasons. Bear with me, let's go through them. The first one is that the best time to invest was 20 years ago. We all know this. We all wish we could go back in time and buy the house 20 years ago. If people are thinking, oh, I don't know this, then I think the way to do this is to just go back to when you bought your house. How many years was it? 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, maybe longer than that? And how much did you buy it for? And how much is it worth right now? Probably a little bit more than you bought it for, I imagine. So the answer is the best time to buy a house was 20 years ago, but we cannot go back in time. So the next best time to buy a house is right now. The second thing is that your financial security now is in your own hands. If you have learned anything from the way that the government has been operating over the last decade or so, is that, you know, pensions are just about around now. Pensions may not be around in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, in 30 years' time. And as a result, we have to look after ourselves. We cannot just rely on the state, rely on other people to look after us. Then the only way to create financial security for ourselves is to invest. Property is a great investment because it's low risk and it gives an income every single month for your future. The next thing is that you don't need to wait for the perfect time. As I mentioned previously, unlike in the stock market where you have to buy the stock for a particular price, in the property market, it depends on the ability of the buyer and the seller to negotiate the price. And therefore, there's never the right time to buy the price because we can always negotiate the price. And the last point there, your savings are losing value. I'm sure most of you are well aware that inflation at the moment is over 10% in the UK, which is insane. The inflation should be at around 2 to 3%. The fact that it's at 10%, that means that something that cost you £10 today is going to cost you £11 tomorrow. Or something that cost you £10 a year ago will cost you £11 today, is probably a better way of saying it. But that means that over time, the money that you have that's sitting in the bank doing nothing is eroding away. It means that the thing that you could buy for £100 today, in 10 years from now, that thing is going to be £300 or £200. You're not going to be able to buy the same amount with £100. You're going to be able to buy less. And so your money is eroding away unless you put it into inflation-proof assets like property. So that is all very good. Like I said, those are all very generic reasons why property is a good investment. But actually, the next point is more important. 2023 presents a unique opportunity for us. So we know that last year, I'm sure most people are in the same boat. Last year was a little bit of a roller coaster. In the summer, everybody wanted to buy a property. And then by the time we got around to September, everything had sort of dropped off a cliff, fueled by the political turbulence with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. Since last September, here's what's happened. Inflation has still been over 10%. Mortgage interest rates have been at record highs compared to where they have been over the last 10, 15 years. An economic recession has loomed over the UK. We've always been worried about it. We've been hearing about it in the news, in the media. Are we going to go into a recession? Buyer confidence has been very low. People are very slow to act, slow to do anything because they don't know what's going to happen in the future. Demand for properties has been therefore quite low. And as a result of the demand being low, property prices have been more negotiable now than previously. So what that means is that because there has not been so much demand for properties, but the supply is still the same, the price of the property is more negotiable or even reducing a little bit. However, things are starting to look up. This is what I want you to focus on. So we've had the whole bad news. Let me tell you the good news. First thing is inflation has recently started to fall. It's not started to fall massively, but we are starting to decline. And the plans that the government have is for that to decline much, much further. I'll go into that in a little bit. Next thing is that although the Bank of Interest only very recently last week increased their interest rates by another 0.25% to 4.25% last Thursday, it's widely accepted that we're probably pretty much at the peak now. We're not going to get to 6% interest rates unless there's some black swan event, unless there's some catastrophic event. Right now, we're thinking the UK is thinking that we're probably going to flatten out about 4.25, which is where we are right now. Maybe another 0.25% on top of that, but that's basically where we're going to be. So it's not going to go so much higher from where it is right now. We're at the peak, almost at the peak. And more importantly, that although the base rate has been increasing, which we saw from the last picture, the mortgage interest rates have actually been steadily declining since last September. And the reason why the mortgage interest rates have been declining is because the economic outlook is looking more and more positive. So what happened, you can see here on the graph, from Q3 to Q4 last year, the interest rates hiked up massively. And the reason why they hiked up is because this huge amount of uncertainty came into the market. But what happened is that the lenders completely overshot. They thought, oh my God, this is going to be the end. And so they just went really, really high. And because they went really, really high, even though the base rates are increasing, they have the ability to reduce their rates and still make profit on the money that they have lent to you. So right now, what they can actually do, and what they have been doing since September, is reducing those interest rates steadily. And as well as that, we now know that the chance of a recession is actually quite low. In the most recent spring budget, the OBR has revised its GDP growth forecast and says that the UK economy is now expected to avoid a recession in 2023. So what I'm saying to you is that it did all look very doomy and gloomy from September until now. but we've now had news that actually it's looking up going forward. This graph shows you buyer confidence, and it can show you that buyer confidence is actually increasing. And whilst all that is going on, whilst all that positivity is happening, the demand for properties has not yet fully recovered, and prices are still negotiable. So that creates a short-term window of opportunity for savvy investors to purchase properties at a discounted price. So the reason why I think 2023, and specifically now, is a great time to invest in property is because the market thinks that everything is going to end, but we have foresight that the future is going to be bright, but people have not adjusted their expectations yet. So people are still nervous. So what we can do is we can say, well, let's get involved now whilst the prices are still negotiable, whilst we can still get a little bit of a discount on the property price. And it means that that will be all the more profit that we'll make in the future. Again, they say a picture tells 1,000 words. So let me help you understand where we are. This graph shows the impact of the cost of living crisis on property prices. I want you to see the first section between 2015 and 2018. At this point, this is where purchasing properties, we were purchasing properties at less than the asking price. That was just the norm. So if the asking price was £125,000 for a property, for example, we could typically buy it for £115,000. I mean, we would get a discount anyway, but we could buy it for £115,000. Then between 2018 and 2022, there was a lot of demand for properties. Demand spiked. And because of that demand, there's lots more people that want to buy the houses. Whilst the asking price was £145,000, because there was 10 people that wanted to buy the house, people had to bid 146, 147. Before you know it, 155. So it was asking for £145,000, and people ended up buying it for £155,000. Now we want to look at where we are right now, 2023, 2024. We are in that privileged position again, where the asking price might be £170,000, but we can purchase it for £160,000. So again, we can get that little bit of a discount when we're buying. It doesn't sound like a huge amount of money to get £10,000 off, but the fact is, if you're buying more than one property, these numbers add up. And more importantly, you have two options. Either you get the discount, or you buy in 3 months' time or 3 years' time and you don't get the discount because you'll buy it at a more expensive price. Just look at this graph to show you something else. In 2015 to 2018, the house prices were just over £100,000, and now they're £170,000, £160,000. So it's a lot higher than where it was just a few years ago. And I purchased quite a few properties in 2015, 16, and 17, and most of my properties have doubled in value. And it's not because I've done anything special. All I've done is I bought them and I haven't sold them. They're just sitting there. They're rented out and they're earning money. So that's exactly what we expect to happen. And that's where I believe that the opportunity is. The next question then is, well, how long will this opportunity actually be around? That's what we need to know. Well, with mortgage rates already starting to fall and the future looking less bleak day by day, every day there's more and more positive news. Oh, the interest rates have gone down again, or oh, more and more lenders are coming to the market, or there's more properties on the market to buy, whatever it might be. That means that I believe there's just a 3 to 6 month little window of opportunity to snap up these properties before consumer confidence returns to the market and the prices start to rise again. Ultimately, and I'll show you a graph in a little bit to show you exactly what I mean, but I think that what's going to happen is by the time we get to July, August, September, people will say, oh, well, you know, we're back to normal again. There's no cost of living crisis anymore. Inflation is coming down. It's not going to be down, but it is coming down. And so, you know, we can spend again. We talk about the cost of living crisis, but another thing that I want you just to check in with yourself right now, for the people that are on this call, how many of you have stopped eating out at restaurants? Nobody. How many of you have changed anything about your lifestyle at all? Nobody. So whilst there is a cost of living crisis apparently around, it's not really affected a lot of people. And as a result of that, this is exactly why I think consumer confidence is going to return to the market, and then property prices are going to continue to increase as they have for the last 50, 100 years. Okay, but what about? There's always going to be some people who have some questions, so let me answer those questions for you right now. Well, what if the property market crashes? This is the one that's on the lips of everybody. But what if the property market crashes? So of course that from time to time, there's going to be corrections in the market. They might go slightly up, they might go slightly down. But for people who are making a return over the long term, there will never be a wrong time to buy property. So imagine that if I bought the property and it dropped by even 5%, 10%, or whatever it dropped by. Well, it doesn't matter. I just don't sell it. I just keep it. And if I keep it, then tomorrow or the day after or the next year or the following year, it will go back up in price. So there's never the wrong time to buy property. Now, it's true that property prices are in the process right now are negotiable, may even drop a little bit. But the OBR has said, so the OBR being the Office of Budget Responsibility, have said that they expect property prices to drop by about 5%. So if they expect property prices to drop by 5%, and just for context, when we had the global financial crisis of 2008, long time ago now, but when we had that massive crisis, property prices on average dropped by 16.8%. That's it. People think, oh my God, they dropped by 50%, 30%, 80%. No. They dropped by 16.8%. And now we're talking about 5% drop. So it's really not that big a deal. If you think about the fact that over the last year alone, they've increased by 12, 13, 14%, then a 5% drop is not really anything to worry about. So the 5% drop as well is probably indicative of a slowing of the market rather than a house price crash. We shouldn't get involved with that terminology of house price crash. In the last year alone, like I said, prices have increased by quite a lot. And so 5% isn't going to send anybody running for the hill. On top of that, the upside is that the uncertainty has led to a short-term drop in demand right now, which is where we can save money on the purchases, as I mentioned. One of the clients that we purchased for at the beginning of February, I think it was, or end of January, he saved £25,000 because he bought then when nobody else wanted to buy. So it's all about actually getting in when everybody else doesn't want to buy. The next thing people say, oh, well, the market, let's look at the market cycles, because actually property market, like the economic market, operates in cycles. What I've done here, I don't want you to take this literally because I have created this. So the cycle is already there, but I have plotted the years onto the cycle. So don't take it literally because it may not be 100% correct. But this is just my opinion of where I think we are. I think that we are here in the mid-cycle recession. We are in the 2020 to 2024 phase. We're going through a bit of a bumpy period. But guess what happens after that? It just goes up again. So the property market cycle, let me run you through it. We have an expansion, and then everyone says, oh my God, property prices are increasing like crazy. And then someone says, well, what if it crashes? And because they say that, everyone starts getting worried a little bit. And so we go through a mid-cycle recession. We go through a little something where people are uncertain. And then the property prices start to increase again. And because they start to increase, people are going, oh my God, the market isn't going to crash. It's just going to keep going. So what happens in the last 6 months, the last year of the cycle? Everybody gets involved. Now, the key here for anybody that's listening to this is do not get involved at the top over here just before the crash. That's not where you want to get involved. You either want to get involved here, which is where we are, or you wait until we're back down to 2030, which is the other side of the crash. Now, it's up to you whether you want to wait till 2030 or whether you want to get involved now. But ultimately, time is short, and whatever you do, don't buy in the last phase. When everyone else is buying houses, that's when you should not be buying houses. Perfect. As well as that, house prices, as we know, tend to increase over time. And this is just a graph that I pulled up of just normal average house prices. And it shows you that average house prices in the UK have increased since the year 2000 by 285%. That's 13% every single year without fail. If you average it out, of course, we had the massive crash of 2008. And you can see, look, it brought us down a little bit. But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't really do anything. Prices will still continue to go up. And if you think about this as a, what is this, 10, 20, 35-year timeline, if you buy the houses, let's say this year, next year, whatever, in 35 years' time, this is what you can expect from your houses as well. They'll go from, let's say, 50 grand to 300 grand. What else have I got to tell you here? Yeah, I think that's okay. And then the final thing is, like people always say to me, oh, Boran, what happens if the mortgage rates don't come down? Well, the people that say this, they just don't understand economics. The reason why the mortgage rates are high is because inflation was high. So if inflation is high, the Bank of England has to increase mortgage rates so we can discourage people from spending. People say, I don't want to spend anymore because it's too expensive for me to spend. So they don't borrow, they don't spend, and they save instead. Because they're saving, that means that inflation will come down. If inflation comes down, the interest rate doesn't need to be so high. So the interest rate will come down as well. So the interest rate will definitely come down again. It is already coming down. I don't think that is one that we have to worry about. Cool. So let me get into then, how can you get started? What are the steps that you need to take? The first thing that I'll say to you to do is to go to, if you're on social media, go to social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, whatever, and follow us, Lifestyle Property People. We have loads of great tips, hints and tips for beginner investors, how to get involved, what to do about it, etc. As well as that, if you are not on social media, you can go to our website, which I'll give you at the end, and sign up to our newsletter. You'll just get a whole bunch of information. There's no sales in it or anything like that. You, free of charge, you'll get all the information about how to go about investing. So step one, this is what you actually need to do. The first step is you have to ensure that you have the funds to get started. And you need to not only ensure that you have the funds, then you need to put them all into the bank account, into one bank account, so that when somebody asks you to prove that you have the funds, they're there. You can get a statement to get it. For a lot of people, they have funds in loads of different places, and they'll have funds in their ISA account or this account or that bank account, my mother's grandmother's dog's account or something. You need to get it all into one account, and it's got to be obviously in your name. As well as that, when we talk about gathering all your funds together, a lot of people think, oh, well, to buy property, I probably need £200,000. As I've shown you in the earlier example, that is true if you're trying to invest in London, then maybe you need £250,000. But if you're trying to invest outside of London, you can probably do so from as little as probably 60,000, maybe even less than that if you go to some of the other places. So you get that money, you put it into a bank account. That's the first step. The second step is we want to make sure that we have a really good team around us. The fact is that property is a long and cumbersome process. It takes absolutely ages. There's so many fees to pay to everybody. And you just want to make sure that the people that you have on your team are good quality professionals. Let's just have a look at who do we need on the team. Let's start over here with the mortgage advisor. We need to make sure we have a good mortgage advisor that can find us the best mortgage, and that can also find us the mortgage that is going to be right for us and advise us whether we should do a fixed mortgage or a tracker mortgage, whether we should fix for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or whatever. That mortgage advisor, if you choose the right person, they'll be able to advise you according to your personal circumstances. The second person we want to find is the solicitor. And if you don't have any of these people, by the way, at the end, feel free to contact me. We've got teams that we've been using for ages. I'm more than happy to give you their details. We've got a solicitor that will do all of the conveyancing, so that they, if you remember in my earlier process, I said that once you have found the property, you then need to instruct the solicitor, and they need to get the engagement documents out to you. You need to sign those. They need to do some ID checks, and then they need to start doing the searches on the property. So it's the property searches. And once they've done the property searches, then they will liaise with the buyers, with the seller's solicitor to make sure all the queries are answered, and then they'll write you the report. After you've got a solicitor, we also need to make sure that before we even think about actually buying the house, we also have a surveyor. The surveyor is going to go to the property, and he's going to make sure that all of the things in the property are as they should be. There's no big problems. The fact is that if you don't use a surveyor and there's a crack that you don't spot, that you didn't spot on the viewing, then you could quite easily end up costing yourselves tens of thousands of pounds, if not more than that, to rectify it. So it's really useful to get a surveyor. And one of the main reasons why we use a surveyor is because there are ultimately 4 main things that you need to look out for when you're looking at a property, when you're doing a viewing on a property. These 4 main things are responsible for about 90% of the cost of any property. Everything after that is just decorative. The first is your gas. So gas supplies your heating and obviously your cooking potentially. So your gas supply, all of the pipe work inside the house, your boiler, all of that is controlled by your gas. The second thing is your electrics. So obviously all your lights will be on electric circuits, or your appliances will be on electric circuits, but you want to make sure your fuse box and all your wiring is in the right state before you buy the property. The third thing is damp. We want to make sure that if there is any damp in the property, it is spotted and rectified, because damp can be quite expensive to solve. And the fourth thing is the roof. The roof is a huge part of a house, and it's the thing that's going to keep the house dry. Even a little tiny leak can cause a massive issue in the house if you have not resolved it. Because the roofs are obviously quite high up, 2-3 stories up, it costs quite a lot of money to replace a roof. We need to get lots of scaffolding so that we can do the work. The scaffolding in itself can cost you £500, £600, £700, if not over £1,000. So just the scaffolding alone is going to cost you £1,000. On top of that, you then have to pay for the materials and the labor to actually fix the roof. If you make sure that you can look at all 4 of these things before you buy a house, then you'll make sure you cut out about 90% of the cost of buying a house. Any things that could go wrong, these are where it's going to be. And that's what the surveyor will do for you. As well as the surveyor, then we also have an insurance broker. Every property that we buy, we should insure. And I'm running through these in order, by the way. If I wasn't clear, the survey we need to get carried out before we buy the property, not before we agree to buy the property. So we'll agree to buy the property before we instruct the mortgage broker and the solicitor. But during that process, we'll then get a surveyor into the property before we buy it to make sure that it is structurally sound. And we'll also obviously insure it at the point that we buy it to make sure if anything happens, we're covered. You may also need a project manager or a builder to manage any of the refurbishment works. And then once you rented it or once you refurbished it, you'll then need a letting agent potentially to rent the property out for you. The final person that you may need, although maybe a lot of the people on this call might be an accountant, is a qualified accountant. An accountant is going to help you to make sure that any taxes that you pay on the property are as low as possible and that you can offset as many costs as possible. So this is the team that you're going to need in order to invest in property. This is if you're looking to invest in property by yourself. So there's quite a lot of people, but if you need a list, then let me know. Step 3 then is we need to gather the actual documents. So we've got our funds together, we've found the team, and then we need to gather the documents. What are the documents? These are the documents. You need ID documents, which is basically your passport. It's a photo ID, so it needs to be your passport or your driving license. Your proof of address, which needs to obviously have your address on it, usually a utility bill or a water bill, a council tax bill, that kind of thing. And then proof of funds as well. Proof of funds are split into 2 parts. One is proof of deposit funds, and which is making sure, let's say if it's £100,000 property and you're having a 75% mortgage on it, you need to show that you have the £25,000 worth of deposit. And you also need to show proof of borrowing. So you need to be able to show that the bank has already accepted or agreed in principle, is what they call it, to lend you the £75,000 in my £100,000 example. So those are the 3 lots of documents or 4 documents that you need to get together before you can even start to look at properties. The next step is quite an interesting one. It's to build relationships with local estate agents. Now, a lot of people think, oh, well, I'll just go onto Zoopla or Rightmove or something and I'll do some scrolling and I'll click it, and before you know it, well, I bought the property. Of course, you can do that. But if you build relationships with the local agents that are around you and you take some time to look at properties with them, they'll get to know you. And because they get to know you, they will be able to advise you as to what prices the properties will be going at. If a seller wants to sell it a little bit cheaper, maybe they'll call you and they'll say, hey, listen, I know you're looking for a property. Here is a really good property that I think you might be interested in. You should definitely consider buying this one. Property is a people game, and that means there's a lot of people involved in it. If you can build relationships with agents, it will definitely stand you in good stead. This picture that you can see in the middle, the reason why it's got lots of boxes of cakes and biscuits in it is because the way that we build relationships with agents is we take cakes and biscuits. It's a really simple trick, but the fact is, if I gave you a cake or a box of biscuits, you would automatically like me. So here we go. I'm giving you the trade secrets. If you want to get the estate agents to like you, take them some biscuits. The fifth part, this is the final part of getting started in property, is you need to start doing viewings. Now, this is the difficult part because all the other steps so far you could pretty much do from your own home. When you get to this part, you realize, oh my gosh, I actually have to go to the location and start looking at properties and viewing properties. First thing to say here is that if you're looking at viewing properties outside of London, you need to make sure that you organize yourself. You might say, I'm going to take Friday off and then do a whole day worth of viewings. That's exactly how I started. On the other thing I was going to mention was, just that if you book a viewing in, make sure you turn up to the viewing. Sometimes you think, oh, I've done 3 viewings already, I don't want to do another one. The fact is, property is a numbers game as well. So we do probably about 20 viewings every single week, 20. That takes up a lot of time, but that's how you find the best properties, because you go and do all the viewings and then you find that you cherry pick the ones that you like. If you're just going to do 3 or 4 properties to view them, you're probably not going to find the best property out there. Now, this is the, I think the last part of the presentation, which is pitfalls that to avoid that would cost you thousands. I think this one is really important. So we've purchased over 350 properties for ourselves and our clients over the last 4 or 5 years. And in doing that, we've made lots of mistakes. Thankfully, our clients have not had to pay for the mistakes. We've paid for the mistakes. But the point is, we have learned a lot of lessons. And what I want to do is I want to teach you those lessons, or at least make you aware of them so that you don't have to learn them the hard way. One of the really great quotes that I remember hearing once was, life is too short to make all the mistakes yourself, so you might as well learn from mine. So we've seen it all. Here are some things that you need to look out for when investing in buy-to-let property that could end up costing you thousands. We'll take these one by one. The first is hidden costs. A lot of people don't realize, like I said, people think, oh, well, if a house is 100,000, 25% deposit is 25,000, I can buy the house for 25,000 pounds. Easy. It's just not that easy. There's a lot of hidden costs when it comes to buying properties. I've already mentioned previously about the solicitor's fees, the mortgage advisor's fees, refurbishment fees, stamp duty, all of those things. But there's also these hidden fees. Hidden fees are fees that are not explicitly mentioned when we look at these. So hidden fees will be, for example, accountancy costs. Well, once you get the property set up, you'll have to pay for someone to do your annual accounts for you. You also have ILAs. ILAs are independent legal advice. If you buy in a limited company, then the lender will make you basically get some legal advice, and that will cost money. As well as that, you have mortgage product fees. So a lot of the mortgages, let's say they say it's going to be 3.5% or 4% or whatever it's going to be, there'll also be a product fee that you have to pay, or you can add to the loan, but it's an additional amount that you need to account for. So all of these are hidden fees. The second one is paper returns. So we have to distinguish between paper returns and actual returns. And the difference there is paper returns is what it's supposed to be. What somebody tells you on a piece of paper, that's what it's going to look like. Actual returns is after you've had the property for 5 years or 10 years, then you can see exactly how did it work out. Did I actually get the rent that I was supposed to? Did the mortgage actually work out to what it was supposed to? Did my insurance gone up or stayed the same? Were there any other costs that I incurred? So the actual returns is what we really want to look at, not the paper returns. The next part is B2B street line terraces without gardens. B2B means back to back. Maybe you will have heard of this term. If you haven't, I'll explain it. You have a back-to-back property is a property where you have one house, and then usually at the back of the house over here, you would have a garden. But in these houses, at the back of the house, there's no garden. At the back of the house, there's just another house. So the houses share the same back. That's why they're called back-to-back. They share the same back, and then they both face outwards onto a road. Back-to-back street line terraces without gardens are really low quality properties. And when we first started buying houses in 2014, 15, 16 time, we were buying a lot of these houses because they were really, really cheap. £60,000 we could buy, £70,000 we could buy a back-to-back house very easily. The problem with them is that because they're cheap, you end up getting, they're cheap because they're cheap houses, but they're also in cheaper areas. And if they're in cheaper areas, you probably tend to have sort of a slightly lower quality of tenant. If you have a lower quality of tenant, you're going to continuously get a barrage of issues and problems that you're not going to get with higher quality tenants. So we have moved our model away from buying very, very cheap things and trying to get the absolute best return, paper return, to buying more expensive property, but still very good quality property that rents out very well. And it means that the actual return is more in line with the expected return. The next point is to check the property. I mentioned earlier these 4 items: the roof, damp, gas, and electrics. Those are the things that you need to check for, because if you get those things wrong, it could end up costing you thousands of pounds. The 5th point is Japanese knotweed. If you've not heard of it, this is really serious. Japanese knotweed is an invasive plant. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can a plant bring down my house? But this is the point. This particular plant, it burrows underneath your house and eats through all of the foundations. And as a result, if you have this plant within a certain distance of your property, the lender will not lend, and ultimately you're going to get stuck with a problem. So it is treatable, but it's quite expensive to treat. You should definitely Google after this this webinar, what is Japanese knotweed, and make sure we can get that covered off. Fresh paint. If a wall has been freshly covered up or freshly painted, it could have been covering up a problem. So maybe there's a crack and they've just painted it over so you can't see the crack. If, like I said, if the whole house has been painted, that's slightly different. But if one wall or one patch has been painted, but the rest of the house hasn't, then maybe the sellers are trying to cover something up. Just last few slides now. Unadopted or private roads. Sometimes you get roads, at the moment, usually the street that we live on, the road will be adopted by the council. That means that the council are responsible for repairs to that road. However, in some areas, not all the roads are adopted by the council. That means that they're private roads. And if they're private roads, then the residents who live on that road have to pay for the maintenance of that road. You don't want to get stuck owning a house that is on a private road, because at some point in the future, it might not be now, it might be in 10 years, 20 years, whatever. At some point, you're going to have to contribute towards fixing that road or maintaining that road. The next point is selective licensing. This is new licenses that have come out over the last few years to, what's the best, I mean, the best way of saying it is they've come out so that we can make local councils more money. That's why they've come out. But they are supposed to be a way of the council identifying which properties are rented and then seeking a license for renting properties in those areas. So be careful. If you buy a property, it's not a problem if you have selective licensing, but you need to be able to take that cost into account, because there is a cost associated. I think it's an annual cost or a 5-yearly cost that you have to pay depending on the council. Beware of bad neighbors. If you go to view a property and it's, you know, very cheap, there's a reason why it's very cheap. You have to find out why it's very cheap. Is it because there's a problem with the property, or is it because there are potentially some bad neighbors next door that nobody else wants to live next to? Final few points. Meter readings. At the time that you complete on the property, make sure you take date-stamped photos of the meters. So you can find apps these days where you can take a picture, and at the bottom right-hand corner, it will tell you the date and time that it was taken. The reason why that's important is as soon as you have completed on the property, you want to take the meter reading and send it to the supplier. If you don't do that and the previous tenant has left a debt there, then the supplier might make you pay it. In the south, it's very rare that that there are gas and electric meters that are prepaid. Most of them are postpaid, which means that once you've used the electric, then you pay for it. In the north, sometimes we have prepaid meters, which means you have to top up the meter before you can use it. So you just have to be careful and make sure we take pictures of the meters when you complete. Some people like to think that actually what I'm going to do to avoid all of the refurbishment costs is I'm just going to buy a new property. So one that's just, a new build property. Now, the challenge with a new build property is what they have. They call it a virgin premium. They have a virgin premium on them. It's the equivalent of you buying a brand new car. I don't know if you know this, but if you buy a brand new car, the moment you drive it off the showroom, it drops in value considerably. And that's exactly the same with a new build property. It's got a virgin premium on it. And as soon as the first person lives in it, it goes down in value quite considerably. As a result of that, you need to be careful about buying new build properties, and make sure you're buying them at the right price. And the final one here is a really important one. It's one that I have personally myself been stung by, is developers' loans. So some people say, look, instead of you buying the house, why don't you lend me the money because I build houses? So what they'll say is, I build the house, and once I build the house, you'll have the house, and so you're giving me a deposit towards the house that I'm building. The challenge with that is that you're not actually securing your money against an asset. You're securing your money against the word of effectively a builder or a developer. And if the developer goes bust, then your money goes bust as well. To tell you how this actually works, let's say you're buying a house and you give the developer some money to secure, that particular house. They are building it and you're going to secure the house. They take that money and they use that money to build the house. So it's not that they've kept that money in the bank for you. They're using that money to build the house so that when the house is built, they'll then give you the house at the end. So if they use that money to build the house and then for whatever reason the house doesn't complete, maybe there's a pandemic or there's some issue, if they don't complete on the house or they don't manage to sell it for the price that they want to sell it for, then you will lose your money. It's one to be very careful of. So I mentioned to you that I was going to give you a gift if you stay to the end. We are nearly at the end. So here is my gift to you. If you are looking to invest in property, or you at least you want to know more, then why not take this test? This is a free test that we have invented. It will take you less than 2 minutes to do. It's 20 questions long. To do the test, you have to go to this link at the bottom, http://lifestyle property people, that's our company, lifestyle property people.scoreapp.com, lifestylepropertypeople.scoreapp.com. And if you go to that link, then you'll be able to take this test. Let me just put it in here for you. .scoreapp.com, lifestylepropertypeople.scoreapp.com. I have just put the link in the comments box in case anybody wants to access that. It's a free test, like I said, and let me tell you more about this. It will take you 2 minutes to do. This scorecard is what it is. It will take you 2 minutes, 20 questions, and it will measure you against the 4 property investing principles required to succeed in property. And this is something that we've discovered by helping over 150 people buy their own buy-to-let properties. These are the 4 areas that it will assess you in: your investment model, your professional partners, your experience and expertise, and your physical and mental capacity. So once you have that, you will know how equipped you are to take advantage of the opportunity that I have just mentioned to you. And that brings us nicely to the end. So thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it. And any questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
What I would like to just maybe go through some of the questions on the chat, Shivbhai.
Perfect. Let's have a look.
Okay. And then maybe
yes.
move with the hands up. And if you can stop sharing, then I'll be able to see a lot of the hands up.
Sure. 1 second. So stop share. There we go. Okay. Perfect.
So the first question, which just started off, is it worth for people over 60 to invest in property?
So I think it depends on, one of the things that I didn't cover on this is that any investment depends on your goals. Like, what are you trying to achieve? So before we even start the investment conversation, the first thing we need to say is, like, what is the goals that you're trying to achieve? For a lot of people over 60, they might say, oh, well, I want to have a good retirement. So in that case, then it provides you with an income stream. If for some people, they say, oh, well, I want to leave something for my children, in which case it will help to leave a legacy for them. So I think the answer to that question is, we need to establish what exactly you want to achieve. And then based on that, you can then start to decide which investment is going to be right for you.
Okay. Second question is the example a freehold or a leasehold investment? Question.
Yeah.
If a leasehold investment, what is the age of the lease?
Yeah, but really great question, actually. So most of the properties that we buy are, all the properties that we buy are either freehold or long leasehold. If I'm honest with you, the real reason is because I like the sound of owning the property. I don't want to rent the property. So that's why we buy freehold or really long. When I say long leasehold, I mean like 999 years. What we don't do for ourselves is we don't buy, 99-year leases or 67 years leases or whatever. So all the properties we buy are long leasehold or freehold properties. And if they are long leasehold, they'll be 900 and something years.
Okay. Another question is, what if a property has subsidence issues? London, I understand, is built on clay.
I think that's exactly the reason why we get surveys done at the property to understand whether those issues are there. If those issues are there and you know that they're there, then you can, and you didn't know previously, you can try and renegotiate the price to account for the cost that it might cost you to fix it at some point. On the other hand, there are insurance policies that you can take out against subsidence as well. So there's multiple ways to deal with it. I think it just comes down to the individual property in the individual area that you're looking at.
Okay, I'm not sure whether this is a question or a fact. In Harrow, it is a 5-year cost for select license, approximately £500 via estate agent.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point that I was trying to make, that when we have selective licensing, the reason why I was making people aware of it is because there's an additional cost that you need to take into account when you're investing. And it probably, to the best of my knowledge, certainly in the areas that we're investing in, selective licensing wasn't a thing until about 5 years ago or something like that. And it only came in more recently because there was like a good way for councils to make some revenue, basically. So, but £500 per person multiplied by hundreds of thousands of people in that council who have properties to rent. So, yeah.
I think the second question is quite obvious. What about trees that may affect the foundations?
Yeah, again,
affect the property, isn't it? Naturally.
Yeah. Well, this is the point about getting a surveyor in, because they'll be able to tell you whether there's a tree that's affecting the foundation, that's causing cracks in the property. If there is, then obviously you shouldn't buy that house, especially if it's a tree that's like in a conservation area or something like that, because then you can't cut down the tree. Your house is at risk. On the other hand, there are ways to mitigate those things. But I think, again, specifically for me, it depends on, get the surveyor out, let him have a look at it. If they say that there's a problem, then there's a problem. If they say there's no problem, then there's no problem.
Thank you. Another question is, how hard is it to buy and manage properties in the north if you are living in London?
That is a really good question. And for most of our clients, so just, I didn't explain too much about it because it's not supposed to be a sales pitch, but what we do is we help people in London to buy properties in the north. And the reason why we do that is, as you've seen from the presentation, people are just not aware of, one, how cheap it is compared to the south, and also how much better the returns are compared to the south. And as a result, most of our clients are professionals or business owners that live in and around London. So they spend all their time, building their careers, working. If they're not working, then they have to look after their partner or their kid or their parents or whatever it might be. And as a result, nobody has any time to do this. So because they don't have time, coming back to our earlier conversation, Lakshmi Ben, they wait until they're 45 and they have time, 50 and they have time, 60 and they have time. So we said, look, don't wait. If you have the money sitting in your bank, it's eroding anyway, get in touch with someone like us. We can help you to invest. And as long as you have a fully rounded solution that includes a management agent, then it's not actually that hard to manage the property. It does require, from my own opinion, it requires a management agent. If you're trying to manage a property without having a management agent in the areas that we invest in Leeds and Sheffield, it is going to be tough because, put it this way, I never want a tenant to call me to tell me that the boiler is broken on Christmas Eve. I don't want that. So that's why I use a management agent, just for that one instance, because it will ruin my Christmas Eve. Or my Diwali, I should say.
No, thank you. That's obvious. Okay, another question, and I do apologize to everybody. So we're just probably go just a few minutes over our time. The next question is, what sort of tenants do you have in your Leeds property? Really good question. Going back to my earlier comment, when we first started buying houses in 2014, 15, 16, we were buying cheap properties. Because we were buying cheap properties, because we were like, oh, this is the best way to get the best yields. The cheap properties come with cheap tenants being, low quality tenants. So we realized, having done that for a few years, that whilst it looks good on paper, in actual fact, it just causes a lot of hassle and it's very difficult to manage and all that stuff. So what we now do is buy better quality properties, and the type of tenants that we put in typically are families. The reason why we put in families, for 3 reasons. Number one is because a family usually has
two income streams, a mum and a dad. They both work, so if one person loses their job, the other income stream is still there for the rent. The second reason is because a family usually has a child. If a child is involved, the child is at the local school. And if the child is at local school, they're not going to leave the house for some time. People don't want to leave. People want their children to grow up in a stable environment, so they usually tend to stay longer in properties. The third reason is because for people who are on this call who are parents, you will know as soon as you become a parent, you automatically become 10 times more responsible. So we want tenants that are going to be responsible, not just for themselves, for their kids, but also for the property that they live in. And if you're a parent, if you're a family, you're much more likely to be responsible. That's why we choose typically families, sometimes professionals.
That's good. Thank you. Okay. Next question. What's the difference between the two types of survey, full survey and the other?
Yeah, so there's actually three types of survey. There is a condition survey, there is a home buyers report, and there's a building survey. A condition survey is, this is the way that I like to look at it. I'm going to give you some insider tips. When the surveyor goes to look at the property, typically they look at the entire property the same way. Whether they do this survey, or this survey, they'll look at the same property and they'll look at it in the same way. They'll probably spend the same amount of time. The difference in the reports and the price of the reports is in how much effort it takes to write the report. So the condition survey is typically 4 or 5 pages long. The home buyer survey is typically 20, 25 pages long. And the building survey is typically 50 pages long. So obviously if it's 50 pages, it's going to take a long time to write the report. So that's why it's charged a lot more. The reason in our business, what we do is we offer all 3 surveys to our clients, but we say to them, look, we would suggest that you get the condition survey, because the condition survey, all I'm looking to do is say, is there any problem with my house? The 4 major issues that I told you about, are any of those present, plus things like trees and subsidence and things like that? And if those aren't present, then we have a refurb team that's going to go into the property to assess the rest of the work anyway. So yeah, I think those are the difference between the 3 different types of survey is how long it takes to write the report. And typically I would go for a condition survey. One last thing to say on that is that remember that the surveyor's job is to tell you everything that's wrong with the property. That means that beware, when you order a survey, it will have a whole bunch of red on it because it's going to tell you everything that's wrong with the property. Now, it doesn't mean that that property is rubbish. It just means that there are things that you need to be aware of. So something to bear in mind. Okay,
so the questions are still coming through, but we'll see if we can answer quite a few at least.
I'll go quicker. I'll try quicker. Yeah.
Okay. Next question: what is approximately rehab cost in property? I suppose.
Yeah. So
what's the rehab cost?
Well, let's say in the kind. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, it is different from London. It's also obviously different depending on the kind of property you're buying and what kind of thing you're doing. I think that this question is probably asking about the specific types of property. The example that I showed you, the refurb cost on that might be between average £8,000 up to about £15,000. We don't do more than £15,000 because when you start doing more than 15, it's structural works. Structural works require a lot more time and effort, and there's more things that can go wrong. So we try to keep it at the less than £15,000 mark.
Okay, that's good. There's a long question coming up. I haven't quite read it yet, but I'll read it out anyway, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shivbai, very comprehensive. I noticed the capital gains were over the full value, not just the part owned by the individual. Would you be able to go into depth a bit more on the sort of profits you could expect after paying off the interest-only mortgage? What is the exit plan? And after capital gains tax, personal taxes, feels like the government are really trying to sting you here. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that tax is becoming an even more topic of conversation. I think that one's probably a bit more in depth for this, so I won't answer it right here. What I will say is that, to go through in depth a bit more. Yeah, so what is the exit plan? The exit plan is, this is the way I think, buy 3 properties. You buy them for, just follow my maths here, you buy them for £100,000. In 10 years' time, there'll be £200,000. Sorry, buy 4 properties, buy them for £100,000. You've put in 25 or whatever I said. £400,000, they double to £800,000. You sell 2 properties, so you've now sold £400,000. You pay off your mortgages with the £400,000. You now have 2 properties that you can have in your own name free of charge for the rest of your life. So exit plan is if you buy enough properties, 4 of them ultimately, and then they grow in value over a 10-year or 20-year period, then you can sell 2 of them, pay off all of the mortgages, and that is your exit plan.
Okay, thank you very much. And unfortunately, we still got lots of questions here on the chat, but time constraint tells me we have to end the session. So,
what I'll do, if you don't mind, Lakshmi, I'm just going to put up this slide over here because there are lots more. Yeah, perfect. Because there are lots more questions. Please feel free. This is our website and where you can find me. If you go to lifestylepropertypeople.co.uk, you'll automatically be nudged to join our newsletter. Feel free to join our newsletter. I'm pretty sure that from the website, you can also WhatsApp me or message me directly. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. My main goal for this is to try and help people who are specifically based in London to understand the opportunities outside of London. I don't really care whether you invest. I don't mean to sound rude, but it's more about I want to bring the opportunity to people, and this is the best way of doing so. So please get in touch with me, www.lifestylepropertypeople.co.uk, and you'll be able to join up to our newsletter. And I think there's a contact form on there as well.
So thank you very much for everybody joining. I do apologize that time has become short. And as a, if you can't contact Shivbhai, do contact me at betex@shishukunj.org.uk, and I will pass on any questions that you may have to Shiv personally as well. So Shivbhai, I'd like to say thank you very much. I think this topic it's one of those most nerve-wracking topics. A lot of people want to get involved in, but are frightened and nervous. I know I would be.
Yeah.
And you've given us a lot of facts, good news, bad news, when to invest, when not to invest. And I think a lot of information was there. So thank you very much. Thank you all for joining today. And I'd like to wish you all well. Thank you, everybody. I have left contact details on the chat, so you can contact me. If it's live, you can contact me at betex@shishukunj.org.uk or anandkunj@shishukunj.org.uk. And there's, of course, a Shishukunj website. You can always contact me on the main telephone number as well. Thank you all very much. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.